if you had only one stone, it would be a medium grit stone. In fact, that's the only stone that I would say is absolutely necessary. Medium grit stones should be fast enough to take you from dull to sharp and leave you with an edge that's fine for anything that you want to do in a kitchen. All right, so if you had just one, that's what a medium grit stone is for. Finishing stones are finer stones. They're much higher grit, usually 3,000 grit and above. But for kitchen knives, we want to stay somewhere between 3,000 and 8,000 grit. When you start to go much finer than that, you lose edge bite. When you sharpen, you're scratching along the side of the blade, and it creates these little microscopic teeth along the edge. And that's actually really important when we cut all kinds of foods. So like if you're doing butchery tasks, you want feedback from what's going on. You want to be able to feel what's going on with your blade. If it's too smooth, it kind of feels slippery and it goes right through things. You can't feel what's going on as easily. So you want to make sure you have an appropriate amount of bite for kitchen use. The same thing for thick-skinned foods, eggplants, bell peppers, tomatoes. You need some kind of aggressive edge to dig into the skin. Otherwise, your knife kind of like skids over the top of it. And it might shave hair really well and cut paper really well and do all kinds of fancy tricks. But if it can't cut food, who gives a shit, right? We are focused on cutting food. So that's why we want to be in that 3,000 to 8,000 grit range. The lower you go, closer to 3,000, the toothier it's going to feel. So if you cut a lot of thick-skinned items, be on the lower side of it. If you do a lot of butchery tasks, you're cutting through like fish skin, be on the lower side of that. If you do a lot of things that are plated or served raw, like if you're going to cut herbs that bruise easily, like basil or cilantro, or you're going to cut like sashimi, something like that, be a little bit on the higher side of that. The things will bruise less, they'll oxidize more slowly, and the cut surfaces will be a lot smoother. And that looks nicer when you're presenting that kind of stuff. When you cut something with like a dull knife and you put it out, the cut surface looks really matte. It doesn't look pretty or shiny. So the higher finishes will give you a shinier edge. The most important thing, aside from the refinement that you get out of a finishing stone, is that it helps you with the process of burr reduction and removal. When we sharpen, we're going to form this thing called a burr. And it's a little floppy piece of metal that hangs off the edge of the knife. So for example, if this is my knife edge and I'm sharpening on this side, a little bit of metal will flip up and over to the opposite side where I'm sharpening. And this little flip piece of metal is called a burr, right?
How do you call?
Burr, B-U-R-R.
Burr.
I don't know how to say that in Spanish.
I think that's rebarba.
Cool. That makes sense. Yeah. All right. I've definitely looked that up in Google Translate before, and I'm almost positive that's what it was, but I feel like it's one of those words, like even in English, if I say burr to someone, they're like, what the fuck are you talking about?
No,
like it's the...
in Spanish too. It's not
Yeah.
common.
Yeah, it's like technical words. You have to know like about that kind of thing already. But the point of this little burr is that it's really important. It tells us that we're sharpening the edge of our knife. If you're not forming this, you're usually sharpening the area behind the edge of your knife. Your knife isn't going to get sharp. When we form it, it tells us that we've taken away enough metal to expose fresh new steel that will stay sharp for a long period of time. So when you use your knife a lot, you're banging it against cutting board and food, you get what's called steel fatigue. And it's very similar to what happens with a paper clip when you bend it back and forth a bunch. Eventually, it just doesn't want to hold up anymore. So we need to make sure that we're getting rid of the old steel and exposing fresh new steel so that we'll get sharp and stay sharp for a long time. It's important that the burr is the same size all the way through from the heel to the tip. That tells me that I'm removing the same amount of metal at each place along the blade so that the shape of my knife stays the same over time. So like earlier we looked at your knife and it has the wicked bird's beak tip. That's because you had a larger burr in one area and a smaller burr in another area over a long period of time. And that means you remove more metal in one area than another, and the shape of your knife changed. So when you see bird's beak tips or heels that stick out really far or edges that just look like super wavy, that's usually the result of an inconsistent or uneven burr formation. So we want to make sure it's the same from the heel to the tip as we go through our sharpening. And at the end of our sharpening, we want to make sure that we make the burr's connection to the edge weak so that it's easy to remove. We make the burr as small as possible, and then we remove it. Even though it might feel sharp, it's not really stable. So when you have a burr still on your edge, when you're done, it will cut paper and it will shave hair really well. But as soon as you use it on your cutting board, the edge will fold over and you have an immediately dull edge. And I know that I've experienced that before. I'm sure many of you have as well. So we go through a process at the end of our sharpening to make sure that we reduce it in size, weaken its connection to the edge, and remove it. So the finishing stone aids in that process because it's not as aggressive. It's not as fast cutting. So it's a little bit easier to do that kind of work. So those are the three stones: coarse, medium, fine. In addition to the stones, you absolutely need the following two things: something to hold the stone in place and something to keep the stone flat. Holding the stone in place is important. You don't want the stone sliding all over the place while you're sharpening. And so you want something that stops it from sliding around. And you want something that either provides height, like my stone setup here does, or puts you in a place where you have knuckle clearance, like on the edge of your countertop over here, right? That can be really simple. It could be like a damp towel. It could be a damp towel with a stone underneath it. It could be some cabinet liner like what I have over here. Or it can be like the $100 worth of shit that I have holding my stones in place here. Doesn't matter. As long as it does its job, you figure out what works well for you with convenience relative to your budget. It can be free. It can be really expensive. As long as it works and as long as you have something that does that, that's what matters, right? The same thing goes for keeping your stones flat. I'm sure everyone here has seen like the kitchen stone that looks like the half pipe that you do the fucking tech deck things on. I don't know if you guys remember those. Yeah. You have the tech decks or you have the stone? All right. Like kitchens with tech decks, that's like next level, dude. All right. Yeah. Everyone's had like some stone like this, right? And it's because when you sharpen on the stones are a combination of some kind of abrasive, the thing that actually does the cutting, and some kind of binding agent, the stuff that holds it in place. And when you sharpen, you're wearing away the binding agent and exposing fresh new abrasive. But we never use the stone surface evenly, so they wear more in some areas than other areas, and they slowly start to dish. It's almost impossible to maintain a consistent angle on something that looks like a fucking half pipe. So what do? We rub something on the stone surface to wear down the high spots and make it flat again. And it's important that we do that on a regular basis so that we can maintain a consistent angle on when we sharpen. Now, the important thing for you guys is going to be building that culture in your kitchen, right? Like, there's always going to be that one asshole that sharpens and then just fucking leaves it and doesn't do anything about it. You have to hold that person accountable. You have to make sure that when you're the person that uses that stone and sharpens, you flatten that shit when you're done. And you encourage the people around you to flatten that shit when they're done so that when you want to go back to it, it's in good shape. And you have stuff that will last you a long time. Much like the stone holding setup, stone flattening can range from free to kind of expensive, right? Like on the free side, I have absolutely used the sidewalk outside or like concrete steps, dump some water on it, rub the stone on it, make it flat, call it a day. There's a restaurant I worked at in Italy where the second step from the bottom where the entrance to the kitchen is like super polished. And it's because that's where I flatten my stone every day for like months and months and months. Right. Hey, I don't know. Maybe it's slippery. I don't know. It might be dangerous. But I've used it. And the point is that like the reason I bring it up is sometimes people look and they're like, oh, fuck, you have to spend like a lot of money on sharpening stuff to do a good job. No, you don't. You really need like very basic things and then just good skill and technique. You can buy fancy shit and it might be more enjoyable or more fun or faster or easier to use, but it's not necessary, right? So sidewalk works. You can also get like really coarse wet dry sandpaper from like the automotive store, like Pep Boys, 120 grit. You lay it on a flat surface with the grit facing up and you rub the stone on it. I use diamond flattening plates. They're like aluminum bases with diamonds on one side of them, and they're just really fast and really easy to use, and they always stay flat. It's nice, but they're expensive. They can range from like, $50 up to a couple $100. But this is, we would take something like this and rub it on the stone like this. And when we're doing that, what we'll do is we'll take a pencil and we'll draw a grid pattern on the stone, and that way when you're flattening, you can see where the pencil is being removed. And if there's still pencil there, you have to keep going until it's nice and flat, right? So again, just to recap, what makes a sharpening setup? Coarse stone, medium stone, finishing stone, something to hold it in place and something to keep it flat. Make sense? Yes. Absolutely necessary, medium stone, holding it in place, keeping it flat. The other two things are really nice. Okay? Any questions? All right. There are three main types of sharpening stones that exist out there, and they all have kind of different care requirements. And the three main types are magnesia stones, resinoid-based stones, and ceramic stones. And the names relate to the binding agent, the thing that holds the stones together, not the abrasive that's in there. Ceramic stones are the most common. They're made like pottery. Take like some kind of ceramic clay, something like that, mix it with the abrasive, fire it in an oven. They are porous. That means that they need to be soaked prior to use, right?
Ceramic stones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they need to be soaked prior to use. So when you put it in water, bubbles start coming out of it. You soak it until bubbles stop coming out. You can leave them in water forever. You can take them out. Never put stones back in the box. They'll always get moldy. So let it dry in a well-ventilated area.
And do you recommend that stones?
It's a function of personal preference.
Okay.
Ceramic stones tend to provide really good tactile feedback. They feel grippy because the ceramic binding agent is also kind of hard and abrasive, and so it feels nice when you do stuff. And they tend to cut a little bit faster. But some people don't like soaking their stones. They don't want to have to deal with the pain in the ass of like putting it in water prior to use or leaving it in water permanently. So there are also magnesia-based stones. And the magnesia binding agent doesn't absorb any water, so you don't have to soak it at all. You just splash water on it and you start sharpening. And when you're done, you wipe it clean and dry and put it away. Now, that's really convenient, but magnesia-based stones don't provide the same kind of tactile feedback. You can't feel the grippiness in the same way when you're sharpening. They tend to feel smooth and glassy. And if you soak them, they'll fall apart. So you can splash water on them, but you can't put them in water for a long period of time, right? Resinoid-based stones kind of fit in between those two things. Resinoid-based stones don't soak in a lot of water, but if you leave them in water, they will eventually soak in water. And so you can use them in one of two ways. You can splash water on them and sharpen and continually use them that way, or you can soak them in water, let them soak for a long period of time and use them that way. However, if you soak them, it's very difficult to dry them out after. If you dry them out, they tend to crack. The outside, the water evaporates more quickly than the inside, and it kind of contracts around the center, and they form stress fractures. Resinoid-based stones are really nice. They provide a kind of like creamy, grippy tactile feel, and they leave really smooth, even finishes. So I like resinoid-based stones for finishing stones because it looks pretty when everything is like nice and smooth and shiny. It doesn't really matter. It just looks cool. But those are the three main kinds of stones. So you have to figure out what kinds of stones you have and what kind of care is going to be required for them as you go through stuff. So you don't want to soak a magnesia-based stone, but you want to make sure you soak a ceramic stone. And you want to figure out how you want to deal with the resinoid-based stones. Those are the main types of stones. Likewise, we talked about stone fixers. Like I said, you can use sandpaper or the sidewalk or a diamond flattening plate. There are also stone-based stone fixers, just like the same kind of thing as a sharpening stone. It's just harder and coarser. And those work as well, and they're pretty cost-effective too. So that's that. Honing rods. Do you guys use honing rods in the kitchen? The little all right. So honing rods are not great for Japanese knives, but they can be okay for other knives. The idea of the honing rod is that when you use your knife, some of the metal bends this way, some of the metal bends that way, and you want to realign it so it's a nice keen edge, and the honing rod will do that kind of stuff for you. But you want to make sure that you're using it appropriately, and I think very few people do that well. So when you have your honing rod, sorry, it's not a honing rod, but you get the idea. Instead of using it like this, where you have it all up in the air, take a towel, put the tip of the honing rod down, and then use the knife like this on either side. And this will give you a couple of things. One, it's much easier to have a consistent angle this way where you can see what's going on versus this where it's a little bit more difficult. And two, you have better pressure control. So you're not applying a lot of pressure against the edge when you do this. The honing rods are round and the edge is flat. And so the only point that they come together is this really small point of contact. And so all the pressure you have is focused on a really concentrated area, and that can cause damage to your knife. Avoid honing rods on Japanese knives in general. Whenever you exert pressure against the materials will go through three stages. Initially, you'll see what's called elastic deformation. That means something bends and then pops back, right? And when you cross any material's threshold for that, when you go beyond that point for whatever that material is, you get to plastic deformation. That's where something bends and stays bent. And then beyond that, fracturing, where it chips or starts to be damaged. The thinner and harder things are, the tighter that range is for elastic and plastic deformation. So because Japanese knives tend to be thinner and harder than the Western counterparts, they are much more prone to damage from pressure exerted across them like that. So that's why we don't use them on Japanese knives, but it's why they're okay for these softer knives where they're a little bit softer and a little bit more malleable. They can bend a little bit more easily. Cool.
And how do you know that I know how to difference a Japanese knife with that, but what is the difference between a Japanese knife and a regular knife? The material?
Yeah, so the steel choice, like what kind of metal people use,
Okay.
And then the cross-sectional geometry, so like how thick or thin the knife is, and the hardness of the steel. So whenever you make knives, when you forge them, you pound them out to shape, and you heat them up in a fire, and you put them in like oil or water to cool them down really quickly. And that process makes a really hard crystalline structure. That's the part that makes the knives hard. And then we take them, put them in an oven, and let them kind of relax a little bit. And the temperature and time that you choose for those things will dictate how hard or soft things are. So German knives use steel that has a little bit less carbon content, so it doesn't have the potential to get quite as hard. And they heat treat them in ways that are focused on toughness and durability. So softer knives are less prone to damage and can often be sharpened more easily. They just don't stay sharp quite as long. But you can cut through a chicken spine with one and not get fucked up. Japanese knives, the mindset is really different. They want knives that are really thin and really hard. So they stay sharp for a long time, and they take really crisp edges, and they move through food easily because they're really thin, but they're more fragile or brittle. They can be damaged more easily. And so that's the main difference between like a Western knife and a Japanese knife.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Any questions so far?
No.
All right. Cool. In general, if you're like a more kind of finesse-oriented person, like if you're really careful and meticulous about stuff, Japanese knives can be a good fit. If you're more of like a get shit done person in the kitchen, Western knives can be a better fit. You don't need fancy ass knives to make good food. You need good technique and focus and practice to make good food. You can do that shit with like this. You can do that shit with this. It's just about convenience and enjoyment, right? If you do a lot of stuff and you want something that makes it a little bit easier, a little bit more fun, buy fancy knives. But the fancier knives you get into, just know that it will require more care and attention on your part to maintain and use them. All right? Cool. So now let's talk about body positioning. The body positioning we're going to use for sharpening is actually really similar to the body positioning that works well for cutting. And I find it really goofy that people don't talk about this when people are learning about how to cut. A lot of people walk up to their cutting board and just square off like this, and they're standing in front of their cutting board working like this. And that's okay, but there are some issues with that. One of the issues is that you have knuckle clearance. So if your knives are not really tall, your knuckles are banging into the cutting board this way. When you lean over to look at how thick your cut is going to be, engaged cut thickness, you're off balance, right? So what you want to do is, if you're right-handed, take a small step back with your right foot, kind of like a boxing stance. Switch to the side a little bit. And that's going to take your work area from your cutting board to the center, and it's going to move it to the lower right-hand corner. If you're left-handed, same thing, left side, right? When your cutting area is the lower corner of your board over here, now my knuckles overhang the floor instead of my cutting board. So I never have knuckle clearance issues. My knuckles are never banging into shit, right? I can use really narrow knives and cut stuff. It's not a problem. My arm range of motion is a lot better, so it's easier to move my arm. And when I look down, when I'm cutting, gauging cut thickness, I'm not off balance. I'm much more balanced over here. So this is the kind of body positioning that we use for cutting, and it's the same kind of body positioning we're going to use for our sharpening today. So we're going to take a step back with our right foot or a step back with our left foot if you're left-handed, and that's the way you're going to stand when you sharpen. Make sense? Cool.
¿Entendieron? Perdón, I want to translate only
Please.
that.
Yeah.
Lo que está diciendo es que si ustedes se paran así, es lo que yo les hablo todo el tiempo. Ustedes se paran encima de enfrente de su tabla, así derecho, su cuerpo tiende a tirarse para adelante porque miran lo que están haciendo y sus movimientos tienden a hacer esto, entonces se lastima la espalda y no es cómodo. Lo que él está diciendo es que cuando vas a cortar en el área de tu tabla en el que vas a cortar, tienes que pararte con un pie atrás, con la mano, o sea, el mismo pie con la mano de la que tienes tu cuchillo, y te vas a ubicar así, entonces tus cortes van a ser así y no van a ser así, ¿se entienden? Entonces su cuerpo no va a sufrir daños, no le va a doler la espalda como siempre les duele y van a estar, claro, y van a estar mucho más cómodos y van a hacer cortes más limpios también. Lo mismo va a ser para afilar. Cuando afilan no se pueden parar así adelante de la piedra para afilar. Tienen que poner un pie atrás y depende del lado que van a afilar, se van a poner este pie porque van a afilar o de este lado o de este lado, ¿ok? Entonces es muy importante para su cuerpo. Lo que él está explicando es eso, la importancia de qué piedra vamos a usar, cómo van a ubicar su cuerpo, qué tienen que mirar a la hora de afilar su cuchillo, ¿ok?
Cool.
Thank you, sorry.
No, it's great. And I really appreciate you making it accessible in Spanish as well. So again, left-handed people stand like this, right-handed people stand like this. So that's the body positioning we're going to deal with, all right? The next thing we're going to talk about is what each hand is going to be responsible for. And each hand is going to be responsible for very unique parts of sharpening. So for example, if you are right, is there anyone left-handed, by the way?
I think
Just you? Cool. All right, so I'll show stuff both right and left-handed so everyone has a good sense. So with the handle that the hand you're going to be holding the handle with, we're going to start from a pinch grip. And I think a lot of people get the pinch grip wrong, so we're going to go over that really quick. You're going to use the pad of your thumb and the first knuckle side of your index finger, and you're going to pinch way up here on the blade. It's important that you use the side of your index finger and not the pad of your index finger, because when you use the pad of your index finger, your finger sticks out further. By turning it to the side, it tucks back around, so you're not sticking it out towards the edge. Our middle finger is going to fit right up here against this area. This is called the choil of the knife, so we're going to be right up against the choil, right? And our last two fingers, really lightly gripping the handle over here. You don't want a heavy grip. You don't want to be like super tight on it. You want to be loose and relaxed. If you find that your hand is always hurting because you're squeezing the shit out of your knife, stick your pinky out. It looks ridiculous, but it forces your hand to relax. And that will help you a lot with cutting. The more relaxed your grip is, the better it will be. You don't have to do it forever, but like once you get used to the feeling of being relaxed, you just go back to holding it normal. Having a relaxed grip is really important. So we're going to start all of our stuff from the pinch grip. When we sharpen the first side of our knife, which I'll usually do on the right side here, or in your case on the left side like this, we're going to take our index finger, we're going to move it up to the spine, and we're going to move our thumb down towards the heel. This is the grip that we're going to use for the first side of our knife. This hand is going to be responsible for two main jobs. It's going to be responsible for the angle of approach. The angle of approach means this kind of angle this way, and the angle of sharpening, meaning this kind of angle this way, all right? As much as possible, I want to keep this arm loose and relaxed. So I'm trying not to use it as much for the pushing and pulling motion, because when I put pressure in this arm, I have a greater tendency to either press down or lift up relative to the stone surface. I don't want to do that, so I try and keep this arm loose and relaxed. The angle of approach that we use is usually around 45 degrees, plus or minus a little bit. It doesn't have to be exact, but there are a few reasons for it. One, we get much more surface area contact here than we do here. Here I only have this small part in contact. Here I have this much of the knife in contact, so we can sharpen more at once, all right? Two, it's much more comfortable for my hand to be like this than it is like this. This is a really fucking uncomfortable way to sharpen, so I don't want to do that. And three, our motion of sharpening is always going to be straightforward, straight back, straightforward, straight back. If the knife wobbles in the same direction you're moving, it's not as easy to maintain a consistent angle. Having a little bit of an offset means the knife now wobbles this way, but we're moving this way, and it's a little bit easier to maintain a consistent angle. All right? So 45-ish degrees angle of approach, and our angle of sharpening will depend on the knives that we are sharpening. For Japanese knives, there's kind of a safe bet range, somewhere between 10 and 15 degrees per side, right? For German knives, it might be a little bit higher, maybe between 15 and 18 degrees per side. You can be outside of that range, you can be inside of that range, doesn't really matter. What matters is this. The lower your angle, the more acute that you go, the sharper the knife will feel. So the closer you get to 10 or even below 10, the sharper the knife will feel, but the more fragile or more brittle the edge will be, right? The higher that you go, so like closer to 15 or 20, the less sharp the knife will feel, but the more durable it will be. So if you notice that your edge gets fucked up all the time, maybe sharpen a little bit less acute. Or if you feel like, I need a little bit more sharpness out of your edge, maybe sharpen a little bit more acute. And it's not that there's one right way to do stuff. You have to figure out what works well for you and do that kind of sharpening for yourself. In terms of figuring out what the angles look like, there are a few different ways that you can do this. One, you can just kind of eyeball it, like 90 degrees, 45, 22.5, 11.125, and you can kind of figure out from there. But two, you can use your cell phone for this shit. On the iPhone, there's an app called Measure. It comes built in with the phone, so everyone has this shit unless you've deleted it. And on the bottom here, there's a part called Level. And you can click that and you get this cool like little horizon thing for hanging photos and whatnot. But when you put it down, you can tap it and zero it out. And then when you lift it up, you can see what angle you're at, right? So you can see, for example, this is 10 degrees over here. This is 15, 20, and so on and so forth. And so, for example, I could take that on my stone and zero it out, and then I can put my knife underneath it, and I can see this is 10, so on and so forth, right? So it's really easy to kind of visually see what's going on because that's built in. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. So, again, this hand is responsible for angles. Angle of approach, angle of sharpening. This hand is going to be responsible for a few things as well. It's going to be responsible for our pressure, like where we apply pressure and how much pressure we apply, and for as much of our pushing and pulling motion as possible. All right? When we apply pressure with this hand, we want to make sure the pressure always stays over the center line of the stone. So I'm not applying pressure here or here, I'm applying pressure here. And that means that the pressure covers the entire surface of the stone more evenly. All right? With my pressure, I want to take 2 to 3 fingers and I want to come as close to the edge as possible without touching the stone. If you can feel the stone under your fingertips are going to get ground away and they're going to start bleeding. So you just move them up a little bit from there. All right? So 2 to 3 fingers as close to the edge as possible. And then our motion again, straight forward, straight back. Obviously, this hand has to be involved with that. But in your mind, I want you to think about this arm being relaxed and this arm being responsible for that pushing and pulling motion. The amount of pressure required in sharpening is not a lot. You don't have to use brute strength to get through stuff. In fact, you can be pretty relaxed. So if you have a kitchen scale, you can press on the kitchen scale with the hand you would be applying pressure with and get a sense of what that feels like. So for example, for the heaviest sharpening I'm doing, maybe I'm somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 grams. So when I press on my scale, feel what 1,500 or 2,000 grams feels like. See what that's like. For most of my sharpening, daily sharpening, 500 to 700 grams. So feel, it's really light. It's not a lot of pressure. When I'm doing like the last little bit of removing the burr, maybe I'm closer to like 100 grams. Really, really, really light pressure. Doesn't require a lot of pressure, requires consistency. Requires doing the same thing all the time. All right? So that's what each hand is going to be responsible for as you go. And that's that. Cool. All right. So now we're going to get to my really shitty images. And here we go. So on the first page here, this is the basic format of what we're going to be doing in sharpening. We're going to start, this is like a cross-section of the knife. So you imagine the knife is coming out from the paper like this. All right, we're going to start from a knife that's dull. Whether it's chipped or whatever, the edge doesn't come together in a nice clean point anymore. That's when we need to start sharpening. And what we're going to do is we're going to start sharpening on one side of the knife. So for example, if my knife is coming through like this, I'm going to start sharpening on one side of the knife here, the right side. And I'm going to do that until I form a burr. We talked about the burr earlier, but that's this little floppy piece of metal here. When we form a burr, we're going to feel for it, and we're going to feel for it using our index finger. And it's really important, not your thumb, not your middle finger, not your palm, your index finger. Your index finger has more nerve endings than any other appendage that you have on your body, like by an order of magnitude. There's many more nerves in your index finger than any other finger that you have. And so that helps you feel things more quickly. It allows you to have smaller burrs so you're not wasting metal. And it's easier to gauge how big or small the burr is with your index finger than it is with your thumb. Do you want to translate that, or are you good? We're good? All right, cool. I'm going to form burrs today when we're sharpening, and I'm going to pass the knife around so you can all get used to feeling what that feels like, and you know what you're looking for, so you have some metric to gauge by. But when we're doing that, we're going to place our thumb on the side that we sharpen. So if I sharpen this side, I'm going to place my thumb here, and I'm going to take my index finger, and I'm going to come here on the back side. I'm going to come up across the edge like this. Not laterally, not over the edge, sure as hell not down towards the edge, up across the edge this way. And what you'll feel is there's going to be like a little bit of metal that kind of grabs at your fingertips, and you'll feel it kind of like drag. Yeah.
¿Entienden? O sea, van a agarrar su cuchillo, van a poner su dedo, perdón por esto, ¿no? Van a agarrar su dedo gordo y lo van a apoyar sobre el cuchillo, y con estos dos dedos van a sentir eso que él le llama burr, que yo le llamo rebarba, que es cuando se siente que hay como algo sobresalido para el otro lado, que es lo que él dibuja acá. ¿Se entiende? O sea, siempre cuando estamos afilando vamos a sentir que la rebarba del cuchillo se va a sentir para un lado y para el otro. Lo que queremos conseguir es que eso se junte y se vea todo igual y no se sienta nada cuando pasas tus dos dedos por ahí.
Yeah.
¿Okay?
So going on that, if it's big in one area and small in another area, you're going to do the whole knife again, but you're going to focus less on the areas that were strong and more on the areas that were weak until it's the same size.
Lo que puede pasar no es que siempre van a tener toda la rebarba en todo el cuchillo de un lado. Quizás es más fuerte de un lado y menos fuerte de otro lado. Entonces, ¿vieron que ustedes afilan todo el cuchillo? Quizás si solamente sienten la rebarba de este lado, solamente deben afilar esta parte. ¿Se entiende? Entonces a veces cuando usamos nuestro cuchillo no lo usamos todo por completo. Entonces a veces se desafila esta parte y esta no, o a veces afilamos mucho esta parte y a veces esta no, o a veces esta cuesta un poco más. Entonces cuando tocamos el cuchillo debemos sentir de qué lado está esa rebarba, ¿ok? Y eso también se ve, como dice él, mirándolo así, mirándolo así, mirándolo así. Van a ver cómo se va a ver de un lado más que otro, ¿ok?
I have difficulty seeing it. I always feel for it. If it's large enough that you can see, that's a big ass burr. All right, so like on this side, I feel like this. On this side, same thing. Even though the edge is facing towards my palm, I put my thumb here so I'm not sliding all over, and I feel like this. So the burr will not exist on both sides at the same time. It will be on one side or the other. So we sharpen on our first stone, so like say our core stone, until we form a burr that's even and consistent from heel to tip. And then we flip the knife over, and we do the same thing on the other side until we form a burr that's even and consistent from heel to tip. Right? So coarse, coarse, medium, medium, fine, fine. Now we're at the end of our sharpening process, and we have to go through some additional steps to get rid of that burr, weaken its connection to the edge, and get rid of it. And we'll do that through a motion called stropping. Have you guys ever seen barbers with the leather and the razors going like this? So the device that they're using is called a strop, and the motion is called stropping. And stropping is an edge-trailing motion that covers the entire length of the blade. So we go all the way from the heel to the tip or the tip to the heel in an edge-trailing way. So edge-trailing just means whatever direction you're moving, the edge is at the back of that motion. So edge-trailing, edge-leading, right? Edge-leading, edge-trailing. So we use edge-trailing strokes covering the entire length of the blade at the same angle, bending the burr back and forth and back and forth. And as we do that, the burr becomes smaller, and kind of like a paperclip again, the connection to the edge becomes weaker. And so when we want to remove it at the end, it comes off really easily. There are a lot of different ways to remove the burr, but I use the sponge, the blue sponges, specifically the blue ones. The non-scratch blue sponges don't have any abrasive in the back. It's just like extruded plastic all woven together, and so it's not really that hard. And so you can just kind of swipe across it, and it will catch all the little bits of metal and take that stuff off. And it's really fast and really effective. Some people, they like to use wine cork. And so you grab like a old wine cork and cut through it a few times, and you'll start to feel like the cutting becomes easier and easier as the burr gets removed. Some people will cut through felt, or some people will grab their jeans and strop on it. I like the sponge because it's the most idiot-proof way to do it. Like, I know that if you go through this process and you do the things I'm telling you to do, this shit will work. But not the green sponges. Do not use, they will fuck your knife up. All right? So that's this first image. Does this all make sense to everyone so far? Yeah?
Yes.
All right, cool. Any questions before we move on? No. Okay, beautiful. So the second image, which always reminds me of the Transformers, this is again a cross-section of the knife. So we're looking at the knife like this, right? The black line here shows the original shape of the knife, and the red lines show sharpening over time. And as we sharpen over time, moving up the blade, so our blade is getting shorter, but we're also getting into thicker and thicker sections of the blade, right? So you can see this distance is smaller than this distance, and it gets bigger as you go up, all right? So over time, as you're sharpening your knife, you're going to notice that your knife performance decreases. All of a sudden, when you're cutting potatoes, celery root, butternut squash, the knife is getting stuck more, and the foods are cracking, splitting at the bottom. It's not moving through as easily. It requires more force. The bevel size, the size of the edge, gets bigger. It takes more time to sharpen, all right? This is a normal thing. It happens with knives. But there is something that we have to do about that over time. And what we do about that is what's called thinning behind the edge. So is that blue or green? Whatever the blue-green teal line that's over there, it shows sharpening instead of at a big angle like this, at a much lower angle. And that process is called thinning behind the edge. And it allows us to regain control over how thick or thin our knife is. We talked about looking at thickness earlier. This is what we do about that. So when you notice that your knife is wedging in food, or it's taking too long to sharpen and the bevel's gotten really big, or when you feel it and it feels really chunky at the edge, you look at it and it looks like a battle axe, that's a good time to consider thinning behind the edge. And so instead of sharpening at our 10 to 15 degree range, we're going to be maybe in the 2 to 4 degree range. And we're going to do that until we get it to be as thin as we want it to be, right? You can't put metal back on, so do a little bit at a time. Thin it a little bit, see how the shit goes. If you need to do more, do more. But it's very important that you pay attention to that, because that's going to impact the performance of your knife more than almost anything else. Like even a dull knife that's really thin will cut amazingly well, especially for like potatoes and carrots and shit like that. So this is the concept of thinning behind the edge. Make sense? Cool. All right, so let's go to the next one. So as the knives get thinner, just keep in mind, the thinner the knife is, kind of like the edge angle, the thinner or more acute it is, the sharper it's going to feel, but the more fragile it will be. The thicker it is, the more durable it will be, but the less sharper it will feel. So you have to figure out for yourself, what kind of cutting boards do I use? What are the tasks that I have to do? Like if your task is just breaking down like chicken all day, like don't thin your knife that much, and don't use really acute angles. But if your task is like, like a raw bar, you cut crudo and you do like fine herbs and stuff, thin the shit out of your knife and make sure it's a really acute angle. And if you work with root vegetables, thinner knives will cut through tall, dense foods better than thicker knives. You just have to be paying attention to like the kinds of things that cause damage. So this one is not to scale, but the idea here is that instead of just sharpening one side and the other side, every time or every few times, or once a month or once every 2 months, when you're sharpening, you do a little bit of thinning. So you thin first, and then you sharpen the edge. And that's the way that you would go about that kind of thing. Now, if you have knives that are extremely thin and or extremely hard, they chip a lot, but you like that thin cross-sectional geometry, there's a little trick that you can use to keep the knife thin, but minimize the amount of chipping that you see, and that's called a micro bevel. And if you look at the edge here, you can see that there's like a little bit, or we just cut off the very edge of the knife, and we make it a little bit less acute there. And so we can do that on knives that are extremely thin or extremely hard. It's not good for every knife, but if you have a knife that is that way, this is a little thing you can do, and you would do that on your last stone, your finishing stone, just a little bit at a higher angle than you normally would. So that is called a micro bevel. All right. Cool. So really quickly, I want to go over, we talked about it previously, like what causes damage to the knives. So I kind of touched on that a little bit a second ago, but we were talking about cutting tall, dense foods. When there are three main things that cause damage to your knife, and these are the things you want to pay attention to. You want to avoid hitting really, really hard things. You want to avoid hitting things with a lot of force, and you want to avoid or minimize lateral force exerted across the edge. That's pressure from the side, right? We talked about elastic deformation and plastic deformation and fracturing earlier on, and that's what it is. When you hit something really hard, there's not a lot of time for that pressure to dissipate or force to dissipate, so you get chipping. When you hit things with a lot of force, same kind of deal. So if you're cutting onions, you get in julienning onions like ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, just do it a little bit softer. Same motion, just a little bit softer, right? But the lateral force, the pressure from the side, that's the one that fucks up knives the most. So that's like twisting, rotating, side-to-side movements when cutting tall, dense foods. And if you have like fancier Japanese knives, that can even be the rocking motion when you're cutting stuff. So if you use a rocking motion, the edge is in contact with the board as you're going across stuff, the tip is getting dragged across the board as you do stuff, right? So we can use different kinds of cutting motions to alleviate issues with that. So for example, instead of doing like this kind of thing, instead I'll use a thrust cutting motion. So in the thrust cutting motion, my arm is just coming diagonally back this way and diagonally down like this. But my grip is loose and relaxed. So when I lift up, the tip drops naturally. And when I come down, the tip will make contact first, and I'll continue until my heel makes contact, so that the point of contact moves all the way through, and I don't get accordion cuts, right? And then I lift back up, do the same thing over. And as I'm doing that, my knife is coming entirely off the cutting board, so I'm moving from side to side. There's no pressure being exerted across the edge. So if you want to like, I don't know, if you want to like mince parsley, right? Instead of doing like this kind of shit where you're chopping stuff like that, take your parsley, roll it up into like a nice little cigar, chiffonade it at the thickness that you want. Take your chiffonade bunch, rotate 90 degrees, chiffonade it again. It's really cool. You'll get much more consistent, even pieces. They're the same shape all the way through. And because you're not hitting it over and over again with the knife, there's less chlorophyll loss. You're not bruising stuff as much, and it's better for your knife as well. So minimizing lateral force is really important, especially when you cut tall, dense foods. Like I said, I think thin knives cut tall, dense foods better. It's like butternut squash or sweet potatoes. You really have two ways you can go about it. One, you get like the thickest, heaviest, most beastly knife ever, and you rely on the weight of the knife to kind of power through stuff, but the knife will always wedge and get stuck, and the foods will crack at the bottom. Or two, you get the thinnest fucking knife you can find, and you go through like nice and smooth without rotating. The knife will move through stuff really easily. It won't crack at the bottom. It'll go all the way through. But if you do something stupid like twisting, your knife is going to get messed up. It's going to chip. So does that make sense in terms of what causes damage?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so in the second to last image here, there are a few different things we have going on. Japanese knives often have edges that don't look the same on either side. So like if you look at this one, the bevel is really large on this side and kind of small on this side. And sometimes it can be a little bit different from that, but that's a really common thing you see in Japanese knives, and people use these ratios to express that. They say this is a 50-50 edge, and they mean that it's symmetrical, or this is a 70-30 edge, and they mean it's like a little bit bigger on one side than the other. I was really confused about this for many years. I'm like, does 70-30 mean like I spend 70% of my time on this side, or 30%, or is it like a ratio of angles? So I started asking the craftsmen that I was training with, like, what's the deal? And their answer was pretty stupid, but it's like, do you ever see me sharpening, like counting the strokes that I do or measuring the angles? I've never seen any of them do that. So the way that they explained to me, and the way that I think makes the most sense to deal with this, you don't have to worry about the ratios. Don't worry about 50-50, 70-30, 60-40, any of that kind of stuff. Doesn't matter. What matters is use your knife, cut something with it, and see what happens. Does your knife move straight through food? Does it steer to one side? Does it steer to the other side? Does it wedge in foods? Does it move through easily? Once you cut with your knife, you can figure out what's going on and you can make adjustments. So, for example, if my knife steers like this, that means my knife is exerting more pressure this way than this way. I need to create more surface area on the side that is steering towards, so it exerts more pressure in that way and cuts straight. And I can do that in a number of ways. I can adjust the amount of time that I spend sharpening on either side, right? So like if, for example, my knife steers like this, I'll make this side a little bit bigger, and now my knife is going to cut straight, or vice versa, right? I can change the angle that I sharpen on either side. So again, I can make this more or less acute as I go, or I can do either one. I can do both of them at the same time. I can change the angle and the amount of time I spend sharpening. Just remember that when you change the angle, the more acute that you go, the sharper it will feel, but the more fragile the reel will be. The less acute you go, the more durable, but the less sharp it will feel. So instead of worrying about these ratios, use your knife, see what happens, and then come up with a game plan that will help it work the way that you need it to work. So if you cut and you're like, it steers to the side and it wedges in foods, maybe I'm going to change the amount of time I spend sharpening and lower the angle a little bit, right? Or maybe I thin it. If it cuts straight and you're happy with it, great. If it cuts straight and it wedges and stuff, you can think about what to do about that kind of stuff. If it chips, you can think about what to do about all that kind of stuff. So instead of worrying about the ratios, worry about metrics that you can measure and respond to, right? Use your knife, see what happens, formulate a plan.
So, for example, if you
Yeah.
take an apple and you put the apple in the half,
Yeah.
and you can see like,
It steers like this way.
so what of both ways is?
Yeah, so the side that it goes towards is the side that you want to make bigger,
Okay.
right? And that creates more surface area there, so it exerts more pressure against that side, and it cuts straight.
Okay.
And like you have to kind of figure out how much to do. So again, don't go like making big adjustments. Do a little bit. Sharpen your knife. Use it again. See what happens. And as you get more comfortable with that and you do it on a more regular basis, you're going to learn what works well for you and what works well for your knives. There's not one right answer for everyone. You might cut differently from you, so on and so forth. And so you have to pay attention for yourself, be mindful and introspective with your own stuff so you can be smart about what you're doing. Make sense?
Yes.
All right, cool. So upper image over here, I have a couple of things going on. The red line to the black line, that might be like our primary cutting edge, the edge that actually we're sharpening to get the knife sharp. And the blue line to the red line is the minimum amount of thinning we would do. So we talked earlier about thinning your knife. If this is about like 1/5 of the knife. If you have less surface area contact than this when you're thinning, you're not really making that much of a difference. So normally when I thin knives for customers, we're like 1/3 or even halfway up the blade, really like big impact on overall cross-sectional geometry. So keep in mind that if you ever go through the thinning process and you're just touching like just a little bit behind the edge, you're not doing shit. You have to lower the angle a little bit and do a little bit more than that. So this is the important thing about this upper image. You'll notice that the distance from A to B is the same as the distance from G to H and is the same as the distance from D to E. And this is really important that we have a consistent and even bevel size all the way through, but it also tells us how we have to sharpen the tip of the knife. If we're sharpening the tip of the knife, we have to figure out how to get this E to D section along the spine to come into contact with the stone. If it doesn't, our bevel size is going to get smaller as we go towards the tip. And it just so happens that that adjustment is the same on any knife that you sharpen. When you are sharpening the tips of knives, in order to sharpen the tip effectively, you have to lift up a little bit and you have to rotate towards the spine a little bit, right? And you do that ideally at the same kind of pace all the way through. So either side of the knife, doesn't matter, lifting up and rotating towards the spine. The same is true when you are thinning, it's just at a lower angle, lifting up and rotating towards the spine. So get used to that motion of lifting up and rotating towards the spine. I'm going to show you a few different ways that I make that adjustment when I'm doing my sharpening so you can see a different number of different ways to do it, and you just figure out what feels comfortable for you, what works well for you. Again, there's not one right way to do stuff, but there is one concept that you have to pay attention to and understand and employ something to effectively do that. Upper image makes sense? Any questions? Cool. All right. So the middle image here shows what's called distal taper. And distal taper is the kind of taper that occurs along the spine going from the heel area towards the tip. Okay? Some knives have distal taper, other knives do not. On knives that have distal taper, let me grab a blank sheet of paper. Give me a second. On knives that have distal taper, there will be a section towards the heel that's going to be a little bit thicker and a section towards the tip that's going to be a little bit thinner. So I've just kind of like overlaid those two things on here. So you would imagine the back part is a little bit thicker because it's a thicker section of the knife, and the front part, because it's thinner, is this thinner section here. If you sharpen those two things at the same angle, you will notice that the bevel size on the thin section is a lot smaller than the bevel size on the thick section, right? So that means that if we sharpened at the same angle all the way through on a knife with distal taper, where it gets thinner as it goes towards the tip, the bevel size gets smaller as we go towards the tip. But earlier we talked about making sure it's the same size all the way through. And that means that we have to make a small dynamic adjustment with our angle as we're sharpening. So on knives with distal taper, the tip is going to be a little bit more acute, a little bit more like this, and the heel is going to be a little bit less acute. And we'll make that adjustment as we go through our sharpening. It's not a big adjustment. It's not like 10 to 15 degrees. It's like 10 to 10.5 degrees, like really, really small adjustments. But there's a really cool thing that happens with that. On knives with distal taper, that means that the tip is not only thinner, but it's more acute, and that makes it really, really great for detailed work. So when you're doing like really fine work with something, like if you, I don't know, you're like fluting mushrooms or doing something that bruises really easily, use the tip for that kind of stuff. And the heel is less acute and thicker, and that makes it more durable. So if you have to like spatchcock a chicken, you want to go down the spine, use the heel of your knife for that kind of stuff. So that's how distal taper works in knives. Make sense? Yes. Cool. All right. So the last image here is probably the most important thing that I can show you. When it comes to sharpening knives, there are 7 mistakes that you can make. Only 7. Like, that's it. You just have to know 7 fucking things. It's very straightforward. 6 of the mistakes that you can make, you can see them. And I'm going to show you how to see them. And one of them that we've already gone over a lot, you can feel. The one that you can feel is the inconsistent or uneven burr formation, right? And when you feel for a burr, if you feel that it's not the same size all the way through, again, like we talked about earlier, you do the entire thing, focusing on the areas that are weak more and less on the areas that are strong. So the burr formation is the one that you can feel, and we use our index finger for that shit. Not our thumb, our index finger, right? The other 6 you can see. And the easiest way to see them is by using Sharpie. Everyone has a Sharpie with them. Maybe not the fucking Magnum one like this, but everyone has a Sharpie with them, right?
I hope.
Yeah, if you don't, you're fucking up. Like, that's bad. You gotta have a Sharpie. All right, so now everyone's scared. They're like, it's somewhere. Someone stole it, you know? Yeah. All right. What we're going to do is we're going to take our Sharpie and we're going to color in not just the bevel, not just the very edge, but some area behind it. Get like a good ½ inch of Sharpie up on that shit, right? And so you make sure that it's completely colored in. Once it's colored in, let the Sharpie dry. Like wave it around for a second, let it dry. Sharpie and water don't mix well. What's really cool about the Sharpie is that it makes it really high contrast. So you can see what's going on. You can see where you're removing metal, right? So the 6 mistakes are angle too high, angle too low, under rotation at the tip, over rotation at the tip, not lifting up enough, and lifting up too much. And each one of them shows up in a really unique and distinct pattern, so it's really easy to see what's going on. So for example, in the second image here, this is when our angle is too high. And too high means that the spine of the knife is too high relative to the stone. And what you'll see is that the marker gets removed from the very edge of the knife, but not the area behind it, right? Not the entire bevel. So when you see that, angle too high, lower the shit. Very straightforward, right? The long-term effect of making this mistake is that your knife becomes thicker behind the edge much more quickly, right? It's just sharpening at a less acute angle. So it's not going to feel as sharp. It will get sharp, but it's going to feel much, much less sharp than you expect it to be. So that is the first mistake. Angle too high. When you see it, you lower it a little bit. The next one down is angle too low, and that means that the spine of the knife is too close to the stone. This is what you're looking to do when you're thinning the knife. So if you're trying to do thinning, look for that. But if you're not thinning, you're going to see that the Sharpie gets removed right behind the edge, but the edge still stays black. And that's going to do a few things. One, your knife is not going to get sharp because you're not touching the edge, right? And two, the knife is going to become slightly thinner behind the edge, right? But it's not going to get sharp. So when you see this mistake, you need to raise the spine up just a little bit, raise the angle up a little bit. That's pretty straightforward, right? You see the mistake, you just do the opposite of that mistake. So the next one here, and in fact the next 4, they all relate to sharpening the tip of the knife. But the next one here is under rotation at the tip. So we talked about the tip adjustment being lifting up and rotating back towards the spine. Under rotation occurs when you lift up, but you don't rotate enough, or you don't rotate at all. And when you see that, you'll see that the bevel gets smaller as you go towards the tip, right? So this is actually what's happening on your knife. The long-term effect of this is that the tip doesn't get as much play, and so you form a bird's beak tip at the very tip of your knife. And it's because the area behind it is getting much more action than the very tip of the knife. So you want to make sure that when you see under rotation, you rotate a little bit more towards the spine. On the flip side, over rotation means that you're lifting up and then you're going way too far towards the spine, okay? And when you see that, you're going to see that the bevel size increases as you go towards the tip. It can even like hook back around if you do a really extreme version of it. The long-term effect of this mistake is that the tip of your knife starts to curve up a lot more. So you have a lot more belly. It means when you're short like me, you have to lift up a lot higher to use the tip of your knife. It sucks. So when you see this mistake, rotate a little bit less. The next one is not lifting up enough. So not lifting up enough means that you're rotating, or just lowering the angle, but you're not lifting. And when you see that, what you'll see is the tip of the knife stays black and the area behind it looks like you've just lowered the angle. This also yields a bird's beak tip. It's just a little bit further back from the very tip of the knife. So if you see kind of like a waviness just a little bit further back in, that's usually the long-term result of this kind of mistake. And then the last one here is lifting up too much. And this is actually kind of difficult to see. But what that means is you're going up like this, right? The long-term effect of that is that you lose the tip of your knife. It just gets ground away. But there are a couple of ways to see it while it's happening. If you imagine the bevel is like a flat, even plane like this, when you're lifting up too much, you'll start to see the top gets curved like this. When you look at it, light looks like it's reflecting up and over that stuff. And in really extreme cases, you can look at the spine of the knife and you'll see it kind of like bent over a little bit. That's a sign that you've lifted up too much. When you've made that mistake, the way to fix that is the same way that you would fix a broken tip on your knife. So if you fuck up your knife and you break the tip off, same kind of fix here. And what we do is we grind from the spine of the knife, not the edge, the spine. So you take a Sharpie, you color in the shape that you want with your tip, and then you find like a coarse stone or again the sidewalk or something like that, and you just rub the shit on there until you have the shape the way that you want it to be again. If you make repairs from the edge, again, you increase the amount of curve you have on the edge, but also because you're working into a thicker section of the knife, that area is now thicker, and you would have to thin it to get good performance out of it again. So working from the spine means that we don't mess with any of that kind of stuff, but we still get our tip back. So if you remove your tip by lifting up too much, or you break it off by banging into something, repair it from the spine. And just make sure that you start far enough back so it doesn't look like a wonky little, stub foot tip. All right? When you do your sharpening perfectly well, you will see that the Sharpie gets removed all the way evenly and consistently across the edge, and that's our goal. It's really important that you do this regularly. So it's not like you just color in one time and you sharpen all the way through and you do stuff. No. You're going to color it in, you're going to let it dry, you're going to sharpen just a little bit, you're going to flip it over, you're going to look at it. What did I do right? What did I do wrong? What's going on? You're going to dry it off, color it in again, do some more, look at it. Dry it off, color it in, over and over and over again. You're going to keep putting Sharpie on there until you're so sick of Sharpie you can't take it anymore, because that's what's going to help you see what's going on the most effective way. And when you're done, grab some acetone and like some cotton pads or a paper towel and wipe it off so that you don't have Sharpie all over your food when you're done. So that's the Sharpie trick. That is by far and away the most useful thing I can teach you, because now you can see everything that you do wrong. And then as you can see, like, it's really simple. Once you know what the mistake is, you just do the opposite of it. Angle too high, lower it. Angle too low, raise it up. Under rotation, rotate more. Rotate too much, rotate less. Very, very simple. Any questions about anything so far? Okay, cool. So now I want to actually show you this whole process all the way through so you can see what that looks like. So bear with me here for a second. All right, just make sure I got through everything here. How many of you guys use Japanese knives? Some people? All right. There are two main kinds of knife constructions that you'll see. There's what's called monosteel knives, where it's just made out of like one solid piece of metal, and clad knives. That means that there's like softer metal on the outside and a hard core steel in the center. So like you have, yeah, exactly like that. When we talked about asymmetry earlier, you have to think about it a little bit differently with clad knives. The apex of the edge, the point where it comes together, if you shift it too far off to the side, all of a sudden the cladding is going to become your edge. You don't want to do that, right? So you have to pay attention to trying to keep the apex generally centered. It doesn't have to be perfectly centered, but you want to keep it closer to the center. So when you look at the blade on either side, you can see some amount of the core steel exposed, right? You want to make sure that you can always see some amount of the core steel exposed to the edge. And clad knives are nice indicators of when your knife needs to be thinned. When you can no longer see any core steel exposed on either side because the bevel has gotten so large, that's usually a time when you definitely have to get some thinning done. So pay attention to that kind of asymmetry more with clad knives, just to make sure the apex is the core steel and not the cladding, because the cladding is really soft. All right, sweet. So here we go. Let's do this. I'm going to start with a medium grit stone, but you can start with a coarse stone or a medium grit stone, or if you sharpen really regularly, you can do it all on a finishing stone. Like if you're like I was and being a fucking maniac about stuff, just have a finishing stone there. Like I kept the finishing stone in the third pan near my station, and I would just use that all the time, and I would use it to touch up. So like instead of a honing rod, I would use a stropping motion on my finishing stone, and it was a longer lasting edge and was better for my knife. So I just always had that there. Health department is not down with that kind of stuff, so be mindful. Really quick, actually, before we get into sharpening, does anyone here use carbon steel knives, things that are prone to like rust or reactivity with acidic food? You see it? All right. There's a workflow to working with carbon steel knives, and it's also just nice for stainless knives as well. But what you want to do is you want to manage that kind of oxidation that occurs, the color and smell and taste change. So in the lower right-hand corner of your board, you keep a damp towel, and you have a dry towel nearby. All right. Again, health department is not okay with the damp towel on your cutting board, and also cross-contamination is an issue. So make sure you're using like a paper towel and changing it out, and you keep a sandy bucket nearby. So if they show up, you're like, I'm cleaning stuff. Everything is nice and work clean, right? When you're cutting, like cut, wipe, cut, wipe. The more acidic the food is, the more often you're wiping off the side of the blade so you can mitigate how much acidic buildup there is. And when you're done, you wipe it clean and you wipe it dry. So you're never leaving it wet or dirty for any period of time. It's always clean and dry when it's not in your hand cutting shit. You can do that with stainless knives, but you have to do that with carbon knives. If the foods are being used right away, you don't have to worry about anything. But if you're not using them right away, if it's something you can rinse it off so that you can slow down any kind of oxidation, because it will continue long after you're done cutting. And if you can't rinse it off, keep it as cold as possible to slow down any kind of reactivity. And if all you're doing is cutting acidic shit all day, use a stainless knife, just like for your own sanity. If you're just gonna cut fucking 3 Cambros full of onions, use a stainless knife. But if it's a mix of stuff, you can get away with carbon steel knives. Make sure it's clean and dry. When you're done, give it a coating of mineral oil or camellia oil. No animal oils or food oils because they can go rancid, but that will stop moisture from settling on the blade.
Sorry, what kind of oils?
So traditionally, they use what's called camellia oil. It's from the camellia flower. But mineral oil, which is available at any drugstore, is also okay. It's just that like vegetable oil or olive oil or duck fat or bacon fat will go rancid. And I've definitely seen people like put fucking olive oil or duck fat up on their knife before. don't be that person, you know? All right, so that's the basic carbon steel stuff. So I have my stone. If my stone needed soaking, I've completed my soaking. If not, I just splash water on it. Here I am, I'm ready to go. I have my body positioning the way we talked about, right? 1 foot kind of back to the side. I'm gonna take my grip. What's up?
I was gonna ask you how much hardness you recommend for a knife.
Like what?
The hardness.
Yeah.
For the knife.
You're talking about the metal hardness?
Yes.
Like,
yeah, right.
So the measure of hardness that people use for knives is called the Rockwell C hardness scale. And the Rockwell C hardness scale is what they'll do is they'll take a diamond tip stud and they'll smash it into the metal and they see how much force is required to make a dent, right? The German knives range somewhere between like 54 and 58 on this scale. But the point is that German knives are on the softer side of that and Japanese knives are on the harder side of that. If you value edge retention, like really long-lasting edges, you're going to be on the harder side of that. That might be like 62, 63, 64, even like 66 in some cases. If you value durability, toughness, ease of sharpening, you'll be on the softer side of that. Maybe like 60, 58, somewhere in that kind of range. Again, the German knives will be softer usually than that, and Japanese knives tend to be on the harder side. But a nice, happy middle of the road place is usually somewhere between like 60 and 62. Like that's pretty good for most people. And if you're just like a fucking beast with your knife and you're going to beat that shit up, 58 to 60 is probably a happy place to be. Cool? Yeah, and sometimes people advertise that. Sometimes they don't. Like, I don't put that on the website because I think people get caught up with really stupid things that don't matter. And so I'd rather have a conversation with them about, like, how that knife is going to work or how they cut than to just be like, oh, well, this is this number, so it's not, people get weird about that kind of stuff. I'm sure, like, it's the same on a menu. Like, if you put some term on there and everyone just fucking goes for that term, even though it doesn't really make a difference in the whole scheme of things, like putting gold leaf on some shit makes no difference. So we have our body positioning, our feet are the way we want. We have our grip, right, pinch grip. We're going to move our index finger to the spine and our thumb down towards the heel. We have our angle of approach here and our 45-ish degree angle approach. Our angle of sharpening somewhere in the 10 to 15 degree side. 2 to 3 fingers as close to the edge as possible. And now my sharpening. Straight forward, straight back. Straight forward, straight back. Just like that. I use the heel of the knife and the edge of the stone as reference points. So I know, like, if I start here 1 centimeter in, here I'm 1 centimeter in, here I'm 1 centimeter in. As I move down, I can continue to use that as a reference point to make sure I'm doing a consistent job. So straight forward, straight back. My fingers are tightly grouped together. Wherever I'm applying pressure is where the bulk of sharpening is taking place. So I want to make sure I move my fingers all the way through the blade as I go. I'm not doing like here and then here and here. I move little bit by little bit. If you feel comfortable, you can crawl your fingers up as you go. So you can see my fingers are crawling up as I go. Or you can sharpen a little bit, stop, move them, sharpen a little bit, stop, move them. That's fine too. You don't want to lift up the knife when you're doing that kind of stuff. You just want to be in contact and move them as you go, okay? You don't have to count the number of strokes you're doing because we're paying attention to burr formation. We're going to feel that and make sure that we're doing an even and consistent job by feeling for the burr. So as I get towards the tip of the knife, I have to start to think about my adjustment, lifting up and rotating back towards the spine. And there are a number of different ways that I do that. My preferred way is as I work up towards the tip, I tuck my arm inside. And as I tuck my arm inside, I can start to make a little rotation with my wrist like this. This little rotation deals with my lifting up and rotating back towards the spine. At the very top, I can stop and check. Did I rotate enough? Did I get the point in contact that I wanted? And when I come back down, you hear that swishing sound? The swishing sound is coming all the way back down to connect the rest of the blade. So I don't have like a separate tip and separate edge sharpening. Sometimes you'll see where like people's edges look like this and the tip looks like this, and it's because they're doing those things entirely separate. In doing it this way, we're smoothing that transition out all the way through. So you're listening for the sound of sharpening as well, that swishing sound, as opposed to just this. Hear a difference? Yeah. Right, so we want that sound. So this way, I've tucked my arm inside, I'm using this slight wrist rotation as I go. If you prefer, you can do it way out here too. You can see my wrist will go like this, and I'm lifting up and doing my rotation. This is fine also. Doesn't matter, as long as you're still getting that same swishing sound from dropping all the way back down to the same angle that you were at before, and you're making your adjustment, lifting up and rotating back towards the spine. And again, you can stop here, check, make sure you rotate enough, and come back through. So either one of those ways works. If you figure out another way that works well for you, fuck yeah, knock yourself out. As long as you're making the adjustment, that's what matters. So let me grab a different stone that's slightly faster. I want to make sure that you guys all have a chance to feel what a burr feels like. So give me a second to form a burr.
What number is the first one?
This one is 800 grit. The first one I used was 1,000 grit. This is just a much faster cutting stone. but it's a medium grit. You could start at a coarse stone or medium stone, doesn't matter. I'm just doing the medium stone because it's faster.
We just use the coarse stone if we haven't shaped the knife for a long period, right?
Right, or if there's damage like chips or broken tip, or when you're doing thinning. Anytime that you want to get through stuff faster, right? But just keep in mind that when you make mistakes, they're going to be more fucked up on a coarse stone than they will on a medium grit stone. So until you feel really comfortable with it, maybe just take more time. I always find that when sharpening, it's really helpful to have music on that works well. So you got to get like the high energy music, you know, like the kind of stuff that you would like go jogging to, so you can find like a good pace for stuff. All right, cool. So I have a burr, beautiful. It's not perfectly consistent from heel to tip, and I hope that you guys will be able to feel those differences. So I'm going to pass this around, but remember, thumb on this side and feel this way, and then thumb on this side and feel this way. And that way you'll be able to feel one side that has a burr and one side that doesn't have a burr. So let me pass this and this around so you can wipe your hands off. Please don't cut yourselves, please. Steel knives for a second. If you see on your knife like rust, rust is corrosive. That means that it's going to continue to eat away at the blade. You want to get rid of that right away. And so there are a couple of ways that I go about dealing with that. One, I use metal polishes like flits or semi-chrome, like little tubes of this stuff and some cotton pads. And you'll take your knife and a paper towel and you'll put the knife on the paper towel and you rotate the edge into it and you just rub the shit out of it until that comes off. If the rust is really deep in there, you want to use a rust eraser, which is like a little rubber piece with abrasive in there, or sandpaper, and you go through. But when you do that, you want to see what scratches look like on the knife. You want to follow those so it looks nice all the way through. So rust is going to continue to eat away at the blade, so you want to get rid of that right away. Patina, things that are oxidization but aren't rust, that's like purple, blue, black, gray, those are not bad for the knife. And if you don't mind the way they look, the more the patina builds up, the less reactive your knife will be over time. But every time you sharpen, you're going to be exposing fresh new metal, so there's going to be some oxidation no matter what you do. If you don't mind the way patina looks, let it build up. If you do mind the way patina looks, you can use that same kind of metal polish and clean it off. Just keep in mind that the more that you clean it off, the more reactive the knife will be over time. Are you guys able to feel the burr? It's pretty straightforward. Like, yeah. And you feel both sides, right? So you can see like this is what it feels like when it's there. At the heel? Yeah. Yeah, you felt the same? Yeah. Cool. I think it's like a really easy thing to feel. But if you're going through your sharpening and you're just like not sure, like do I have it, do I not have it? In the meantime, just keep going until you're like 100% sure, right? It's such an important metric that even if you waste a little bit of extra metal just to make sure that you're able to measure your results well, that's important. And as you get better at sharpening, you'll find that you're able to feel it better and you can do a good job forming a smaller burr. Ideally, you want to form as small of a burr as possible so you're wasting the least amount of metal.
Si no la sienten, lo que él dice es que sigan afilando hasta que sientan 100% seguro que la están sintiendo la rebarba esa, ¿ok? Entonces sigan dándole al cuchillo para sentir esa rebarba, ¿ok?
So when we sharpen, when we're sharpening a knife, we need to create the burr first.
Yes.
Okay, that's the first step to do.
Yeah, that's one of the first things.
The same thing on the other side.
Yeah, so like we talked about in the first image, right? Form a burr on one side. So like coarse stone, medium stone, finishing stone, and then the stropping to bends it back and forth a whole bunch, makes it really small, and then the sponge or the cork or whatever to get rid of it so that we're left with a clean, stable, sharp edge. So yeah, as you're going through, the first part of that is making sure you form a burr. You're also going to be looking at the bevel. And so you'll see that there's like scratches that develop from the stone. And the coarser the stone is, the bigger and deeper those scratches are. And so you can see that, and that means that when you go from coarse to medium, on your medium grit stone, you want to get rid of the coarse scratches and replace them with the medium grit scratches. So you can look and see, like, do I still have coarse scratches on there? Got to keep going, you know, until it's all nice and clean and looks the way that you expect it to look at each jump that you make, right? So not only are you like feeling for stuff and listening to stuff, but you also want to be looking at what's going on and making sure the results that you're getting look like what you expect them to look like. And I'll show you that as well as we go through this. Like right now we're using a medium grit stone. So the edge kind of looks like shiny, whitish. You can see some visible scratches on there as you go. Like they're fine, but you can see them. When we switch to the finishing stone, you're going to see that it's going to look a lot shinier and a lot smoother. And it's a really immediately apparent thing. And so pay attention to those kind of visual cues as well as you sharpen. So we've done the first side, right? And that's our pinch grip, index here, thumb down here. For the second side, again, we're going to start from the pinch grip, but this time we're going to move our thumb towards the spine and our index finger down towards the heel. We're going to start sharpening this side of the knife. Some people prefer to switch hands. If you feel comfortable switching hands, you're ambidextrous, sweet. Have fun with that. Knock yourself out. If you're switching hands, it's going to look like this and then like this. You move your body positioning also to line up with what you're doing. I don't switch hands when I'm sharpening usually. So on the second side, again, thumb here, index finger here. There's a couple of things that are important here. One is I can't use this angle of approach in the beginning because the handle gets in the way, right? So I have to start off here perpendicular to the stone, and that means it's going to be a little bit more prone to wobble, so I have to be more careful there, right? And then two, the finger placement will be a little bit different as well. I think it's more comfortable to use 3 fingers here than it is for 2, but you'll see for yourself what works well. So again, we start here with our grip like I showed, and we're going to be doing straight forward, straight back. As we come up the blade, we'll have enough clearance to transition back into an angle, and we'll do that, all right? And as I come up towards the tip, again, I have to start making my adjustment, lifting up and rotating back towards the spine, and there are a couple different ways that I like to do that here as well. One, I can step to the side and use this like golf backswing kind of motion. So again, stopping here, making sure I'm where I want to be, coming back down, same swishing sound. Or I can do small incremental adjustments. I don't know if anyone ever remembers this, but like when you are in elementary school, they have you do on the graph paper this kind of thing, and it's like a bunch of straight lines to make a curve, and we can do a similar kind of thing to our edge. And so in that case, what we would do looks something like this. We come up towards the tip, and as we start to get to the curvy part, say like here, I move straight forward, straight backward, and then I make the tiniest adjustment, lifting up and rotating towards the spine. So instead of sharpening here, now I'm sharpening here. Straight forward, straight backward, tiny adjustment. Straight forward, straight backward, tiny adjustment. And I keep doing that as I work my way all the way up to the tip of the knife. The smaller those adjustments are and the more tightly grouped they are, the smoother the curve will be. The less tightly grouped they are, the less smooth that curve will be. So you want to have really smooth and tight adjustments on that. So again, I'm going to feel for a burr, make sure it's consistent and even from heel to tip. Doing pretty good with that. And we're going to move from our first stone to our second stone, or in this case, we're going to move from our medium stone to our finishing stone. So now I've switched my stones, and I'm going to go through the same exact process the same way we just did a second ago. So my stone is wet, my knife goes down, my grip is the way that I was showing before, right? And same thing here. Now I'm going to take a second and pause here, and I want you guys to see the difference in finish. Give me a second.
It's so crazy how like the sound changes.
Oh, the sound is, yeah, really different as well. So I'll come over here for a second. So you can see like on the finishing stone, this part is like super shiny now. And this part where I haven't hit that yet is less shiny. And so this is the kind of visual inspection I'm talking about where you can see like what the scratches look like. So you can see much shinier and less shiny. So as we go through the stones, you can see clearly the difference between these two sections. Sorry. You can see the bottom and the upper section there, right? So you can see what we're talking about here, where I've just done on the finishing stone is super shiny, and then the upper section here where I haven't done that yet, and it's not quite as shiny, right? And so you can quickly and easily see that kind of stuff. So you can see the finishing stone area and the non-finishing stone area.
Yeah.
Really shiny, not quite shiny yet. You guys can all see that? Everyone's good? All right, cool. So I'm going to go through my whole sharpening process the same way I was doing before. And as I'm doing this, you can have pressure in both directions if you want. However, if you can, the best way to do this is to have pressure on the edge trailing stroke. So for example, I'd apply pressure and then I would relax. Apply pressure and relax. And the reason for that is on the surface of the stone, there's like a bed of water, and inside that water, there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's like little bits of stone and little bits of abrasive and little bits of metal, and they're all floating around. When you have pressure with your edge going into those things hard, it doesn't get quite as sharp. But when you apply pressure on the edge trailing stroke, the edge kind of like floats up and over those things. So it's a little bit better to apply pressure on the edge trailing stroke where the edge is less likely to bang into all the stuff that's floating around the water there. So that is what we are doing here. So again, I'm going to feel for a burr. Ideally, it's going to be much smaller as I go through my progression. So it will be biggest on the core stone, then a little bit smaller on the medium, and smallest on the finishing stone. But you still want to go until you're sure that you have it there. And then we'll flip over and we'll do the other side. Same deal. And you can see how my left hand is always staying over the center line of the stone, right?
Yes.
All right. Cool. So now I can look at it. Scratch pattern looks good. Burr was even and consistent. Now I want to make the burr as small as possible and weaken its connection to the edge before I remove it. So this is the very end of our sharpening process. And the motion that I'm about to do here is a motion that you can use if you want to use this in place of a honing rod or to touch up your knife on your finishing stone. So like I said before, I always kept one in the third pan near my station. This is the way that I was touching up throughout the day when I wasn't doing actual sharpening all the way through. And this motion is called stropping. So edge trailing, full length strokes. So we're going to start, for example, down here in the bottom corner of the stone, having lifted up and rotated back, and we're going to come all the way through this way. Or you can start here and just come straight across. Either one of those two will work. But you can see I'm at the same angle that I was sharpening at before, and I cover the entire length of the blade from heel to tip in an edge trailing stroke. Make sense? On the back side, same deal. Coming back here, lifting up and rotating towards the spine, or doing the reverse of that stroke or the reverse of this stroke. Doesn't really matter which one you choose, but it matters that you do one time on one side, one time on the other side, one time on one side, one time on the other side, and that you're doing it at the same angle that you were sharpening at. So again, you can use Sharpie, color it in, do the motion, see what's going on, color it in again, do it again, over and over. But for touching up, you would just simply be doing this, covering the entire length of the blade as you go. When we're doing this for sharpening, I'm going to do some number of these. Doesn't really matter what it is, but I'm going to do that until I can no longer feel any kind of burr at the edge, right? So usually I'll tell people just pick a number between like 5 and 10 and do that number of sets, like 5 sets, 10 sets, whatever, and then feel. And if you can feel it, do a little bit more. And if you can't, then we can move on to the next step. So I'm going to do this until I can't feel a burr anymore. And this is light pressure. I'm not applying a lot of pressure here at all. Okay, cool. So I can no longer feel a burr. I'll bet you this knife feels really, really sharp when I try and shave my arm hair or cut paper, but it's not going to stay sharp for a long time, so we have to remove the burr now. And this is where the blue sponge comes into play, all right? We're going to take the knife, and we're literally just going to go like this. Super fucking ghetto, but it works. And because we've made the burr really small and we've made its connection to the edge really weak, this is really effective at getting rid of all of it, right? And so that burr reduction and removal is a really important part of the process that we do. Once we are done with that, just in case we caused any damage or there's still something residually on there, we go back and we do maybe 1 or 2 more of those motions, and that's it. Now we're done. All right, that is the whole sharpening process. Now, how do you test your knife? How do you make sure that it's sharp? Go cut food. See how that shit works. Right? Yeah, we did this the other day. Yeah. I use my thumbnail. A lot of the guys in Japan also use their hair. I don't have hair, but what they'll do is they'll take the knife and they'll go to the back of the hair and see like if it digs in. The thumbnail is what I would use personally. And so what we'll do is we'll take the edge of the knife and we'll put it against our thumbnail, and then we'll just pull ever so slightly. And it's not like you're trying to cut through your thumbnail. Like, please don't fucking cut yourself. But what happens is when your knife is sharp and it has an appropriate amount of bite, it just digs in. It sticks in. So it won't move. You won't be able to slide it all over the place. It's just going to stay in place. And you can test all the way through the blade as you do that, all the way through from the heel to tip, and see if it digs in and stays and doesn't move around. You know your knife is sharp, and you know that it has a good amount of bite for the kind of things you'd be doing in kitchens, right? I used to use the wine cork for the burr removal process, and I switched to the sponge. Like, so we have customers all over the world, right? And like when people are here in LA, I can help people out in person. It's not a big deal, and we can focus on like the intricacies of technique. But when I have like a customer in like Germany or New Zealand, like I have to get on Zoom and I have to be able to teach them in a way that's like idiot proof. Like there's nothing that they can mess up, and I can make sure that they get good results from like halfway across the world. The sponge has been the most consistent way for me to do that. I'm sure like if you do this, it works. And so now that's the way that I teach that. But if you use cork, that's fine too. There's another thumbnail test that you can do that gauges edge thickness. And for that one, what you'll do is you'll take the edge and you'll rotate it down towards your thumb, and you'll rock your thumb underneath it. And what you're looking for is you want to see if there's any flex. So on like really thin knives, like on this knife, for example, when I do that, I can see that the edge bends a little bit under my thumbnail, and I can see the light reflections a little bit different. if you see the bending under your thumbnail, that means your knife is really thin, and that's a good place to be. So when you're thinning your knife out, that's one way that you can check and make sure that it's as thin as you want it to be. If you see a lot of flex, your knife is probably going to be super brittle. So then you want to know, oh, maybe I'll use a micro bevel, or maybe I'll sharpen it at a slightly less acute angle than I normally would. If you see no flex, your knife might be really thick, or it might just be like in a really tough and durable state. But it's another way that you can see stuff. You can also cut paper, and sometimes cutting paper is not going to tell you how it's going to perform with food, but you'll be able to feel if there's like little chips or nicks that you missed somewhere along the way, or if it feels different as you go through, like it feels really sharp and then not so sharp and then really sharp, that will tell you, okay, maybe I need to go back and do a little bit more. But again, the best thing you can do is just go work. Go cut food with your knife and see how it goes. And as you're doing that, think about it. Like, how is it working? How is it not working? What do I want from it? And each time you can get a little bit better at getting things to work the way that you want. Make sense?
Yes.
All right, cool. So now I want to show you guys all the mistakes, what they look like, and how we're going to fix those things. And then that's it. Then if there are any questions that you guys have, we'll go over those things, and that will be that. So let me grab my big-ass Sharpie. Big-ass Sharpie. And like I said, we're going to color in the edge of the knife, right? And then also some area behind the edge of the knife. Cool. Now we let the thing dry for a second, so it's not getting all over my stone. It's still going to get all over my stone, and if you notice that the Sharpie starts to bother you with the way it's on the stone surface, just flatten the stone. That's it. It's very simple to get through that kind of stuff. All right, so let's go through them in order how they are on your sheet. So the first one, I believe, is angle too high, right? So this is the Sharpie thing that you guys have. So angle too high is going to look like this. And as we do that, come around so you guys can see this. You can see that I removed metal right at the edge of the knife, but not the rest of the bevel, right? You can see what that looks like. It's just there at the edge that they got removed, but not the rest, right? See where it's removed at the edge, right? And then the rest of it still stayed black. Pretty easy to see. You guys can see what I'm talking about? Like
Oh,
if
yeah.
the Sharpie gets removed there and then the rest is still black.
Yeah.
Everyone was able to see that?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so that's our angle too high. That means that the spine of the knife was too high relative to the stone, so we want to lower it a little bit, right? The next one would be angle too low. And you can see the spine of the knife is really low on the stone, right? So when I have angle too low, the edge will stay black and the area behind it will become shiny, right? So this is what I'm looking to do when I'm thinning my knife, but it's not what I'm looking to do when I'm sharpening my knife. You guys can see that? Oh, sorry. It's like really, really, really easy to see.
That's like more when
So
you're trying
too low. So when you're thinning your knife,
Yeah.
it should look something like this, or even more. Like you want to remove Sharpie like all through this area, like a halfway up the blade or 1/3 of the way up the blade.
Okay.
But when you're sharpening your knife, that's not the result you want to see. Right. It's no good. All right, so we did under rotation. We're going to do over rotation now. So over rotation means that as I come towards the tip, I'm going too far towards the spine, too much towards the spine. Let's fuck it up a little bit more. Cool. So, over rotation, right? In this case, I went too far towards the spine and my bevel got large. And it can even like hook back around a little bit as if you do like too much of it, right? So when you see this one, you know you need to rotate a little bit less. Do you have one of the sheets? Do you want me to bring you one of the sheet packets? So now we're going to do not lifting up enough. So that means I'm rotating, but I'm not lifting up enough as I make my tip adjustment. So when I'm not lifting up enough, you can see as I come up towards the tip doesn't get any action on the stone. It stays black, and the area behind it becomes shinier, right? So this means that when I'm sharpening the tip, I'm not lifting up enough as I go, but I'm rotating. So you can see the tip stays black and the area behind it becomes shiny. It looks pretty much like what I drew in the drawings. But I think it's different when you see it like actually on the blade, like how it actually turns up. Everyone is good with that one? Cool. Now we're going to do the difficult to see one, which is lifting up too much. So lifting up too much means that I'm coming up too high here. Really have to try to fuck this up. It's very difficult to like intentionally make mistakes. Like once you do something a long time, you know, like when you cook like fucking, you know, like steaks for years and years and years on the grill, like, and then someone's like, can you just show like what a mistake looks like? And you can't, like, there's no way because you're so used to it. I feel this way with the sharpening. So I do it all day, every day. All right, 1 second. Okay, cool. So this is going to be the most difficult to see, but when you look at the tip, you can see the light starts to reflect up and over this way.
Yes.
Cool. This is a sign that you're lifting up too much before the tip gets ground away. So you can see the light starts to reflect over the tip like that. Like it's flat, 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 and then curved. You see what I'm talking about? I'll fuck it up more. Give me a second. I'll make it easier to see.
What number is that one?
This is a medium grit stone again. So we were using a finishing stone for everything, but cool. Now you can see. It's impossible to not see. You see how the light reflects over like that now? Exactly. So that's lifting up too much. Cool? You can see what that looks like. Right, like very clear and easy to see the light, but it's difficult because the Sharpie will get removed perfectly, but the tip will look weird. So it starts to reflect like this over.
Oh, yeah.
Cool? So let's go back through and try and show what it looks like when it's all done well. Cool. All right, so I'm gonna sharpen it really quickly and try to show what it looks like when it's done well, so you can see what that's like. And then let me see if I missed anything else. And we should be good. And so you can see, like, I can do a little bit and flip it over and check my work. So I can constantly check. All right, and so when I've done what I'm trying to do well, minus the fact that I fucked this up a second ago, it's even and consistent all the way through from the heel to the tip, right? Sharpie is nice and clean all the way through, super even. And that is the goal that we are looking for here, right? And so you can do this on every stone that you have. Every time that you do sharpening, just do this over and over again until you're so sick of Sharpie. Cool? So that's it. That's the whole process of sharpening. Those are the mistakes you can make. That's everything that you need to know to be able to go about this on your own and do a good job. Just try not to use abrasive things. So like anything that's going to like scratch it, that's not great. But hot, cold water doesn't matter. Soap, no soap doesn't matter. Like be clean. Like clean shit well. Be very clean. That's what matters. The things.
To keep the knife in the back knives.
Yeah. So when.
I read that they used to unsharpen the knife.
If the knife is banging into other shit, it's gonna not be sharp anymore. So if you put the knife into your knife roll, but there's nothing protecting the edge, your knife is gonna get fucked up. If you take a knife and you throw it in a drawer and it's banging around into other stuff, it's gonna get messed up. So like a lot of Japanese knives will come with what's called a saya, a wooden sheath like this. You can store the knife inside this, and it's soft wood and it helps it stay nice and safe. You wanna make sure before you put it inside this that it's clean and dry. You can't clean out the insides of these things. And even stainless steel knives can rust if you let them get wet or dirty for long enough. So you wanna be really careful about that. When I was cooking early on, I had like no money to buy the sayas. So I made what I call like ghetto sayas. I would go to the UPS place and I would get the free shipping boxes. And I would get the newspaper from in front of the grocery store and some duct tape. And I would glue the newspaper inside the cardboard. And I would fold it around the knife and then I'd duct tape the whole outside of it. And I could make as many of those as I wanted. And that way when I put stuff into my knife bag or I was traveling around with stuff, it kept it nice and safe and it wasn't like dangerous for me and it was nice for my knife's edge. So it is important to make sure that you're storing it in a way that it's not banging into other stuff and you keep it safe and clean and dry. Also, be very careful about where you store your knives in the kitchen. Like I made the mistake once of putting my knife roll where the plate warmer was, and some of my handles melted, and it's not great. When you're making knives and you go through the forging and heat treating process, the very end of that is called tempering. So you make something really hard, but it's extremely brittle, and then you temper it. It brings the hardness down just a little bit, makes it more tough and durable. The oven temperature range for tempering is really similar to the oven temperature range that we use for cooking. Usually like 250 degrees Celsius to like Fahrenheit to like 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you want to make sure that you're not allowing your knife to get into that temperature range. So like don't torch your knife if you're working in pastry when you're cutting cakes. Use hot water. Don't leave it in the plate warming area or in an oven or something like that. That stuff is going to mess your knife up. Cool. Yeah, I think that's everything. Oh, the handles and sayas. If you have a handle or a saya that's natural wood, from time to time, kind of like cutting boards, they start to look or feel a little bit dry. And especially when you wash with like soapy water, it leaches the oils out from stuff. To keep them in good shape and make sure they're not cracking, usually we rub a little bit of mineral oil or a mix of beeswax and mineral oil. Like I use 1 part beeswax, 3 to 4 parts mineral oil, heat it up in like a bain-marie. And you can rub that on there and it will replenish the oils in the wood and help it stay in nice and good shape and stops it from like cracking or getting really dry and splitting. So you can do that to the outside of the sayas or on the handles like this. Anytime they start to look or feel a little bit dry, put a little bit on there, let it sit for a second, wipe off all the excess, and that will keep things in good shape in the same way that you can do for your cutting boards if you have wood cutting boards. Cool? That's everything that I wanted to go over with you guys. But of course, if you have any questions or if you have knives that you're struggling with, you want to come and talk to me about those things, I'm happy to help you out with that kind of stuff as well. Maybe I can sharpen a couple of knives for you guys, whatever it is that I can help with. But more than anything, really, thank you so much for your time today. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you guys feel more comfortable with sharpening. I hope that you start sharpening if you haven't sharpened yet, or that you get better with it as you're doing sharpening. And really, thank you so much for making it more accessible in Spanish. I really need to work on that, but I greatly appreciate that help. Really, thank you guys so much for everything today. Yeah, awesome. Thank you.